In the ensuing 30 years, George Lucas's media empire became one of the richest on the planet. Box office receipts for Star Wars movies were dwarfed by merchandising, where sales topped $32 billion. George Lucas had amassed an estimated personal wealth of $6.4 billion. Andrew Ainsworth wasn't faring quite as well. After making props for films like Alien and Excalibur, he turned his back on the movie business. He built up factory units in the north of England, making water sports equipment whilst running his operations out of the Twickenham shop. But money was getting a little tight.
So there we were in about, whenever it was, 19 or 2000 or something like that. And I had these bits of old Stormtroopers and characters from Star Wars sitting on top of the wardrobe gathering dust. And Bernadette said one day, I'm going to ring Christie's up and sell those to pay the school fees. I said, they are not worth the light. And I think they fetched about £60,000, something like that. And the telephone didn't stop ringing.
The fever for Star Wars collectibles had spread across the world, with authentic pieces being exchanged for very large amounts of money. At an Empire Day convention, this poster has a £1,000 price tag on it, just because it has George Lucas's signature.
And I had an American chap, I forget the name at the minute, sent me some pictures of a Stormtrooper helmet he had bought in America and wanted me to authenticate it. And I said, well, I've kept the moulds for these, we've got everything, we've got the paperwork, the moulds, and, we can make some more if you want. And indeed, that's what started off the request for more Stormtroopers out of the same original moulds.
Before the moulds were dusted off, Bernadette thought it best to get some legal advice.
I insisted that we get council opinion before we started, and we did, and we were assured that it was all right.
Carried on the production. We made 56 for the film, and so I made number 57, 58, 59, and so on. It was mainly America where the interest came from initially, and I'd sent about 19 helmets, I think, to America, at which point they must have reached the empire of George Lucas.
Lucasfilms had secured US copyrights on all the Star Wars characters and were making a fortune selling licenses to reproduce them. They'd gotten wind of Andrew's 19 helmets and were not at all happy.
And I think it was Howard Rothman, head of licensing at Lucas, rang me up. He said, well, who are you? And I said, well, I'm the man that made the helmets for you. He said, no, you're not. We made them all in the studios. I said, oh, all right, but I'll send you the invoices and the copy of the money you paid me and all the correspondence. We kept everything and sent it off to him. They didn't reply. They just sent me a writ.
We were astonished that Lucas took us to court in America.
He managed to get the hearing for this point of jurisdiction heard in a small court in Hollywood. They proceeded to generate a copyright claim against me.
Nothing prepared us for the vitriol that happened.
Fearing jail in the US, Andrew declined to attend, so the case continued undefended, with Lucas's lawyers denouncing him as an opportunist charlatan.
They said I had nothing to do with the film.
The fact he was called a backstreet shyster and that sort of thing was extraordinarily unpleasant.
They accused me of being a complete fantasist, and the damages incurred by me infringing their 35 points of copyright amounted to a claim of some $20 million, and proceeded to try and collect it in the UK.
We only sold, I think it was about 19 helmets, something like that, before he came back with it. I thought that was despicable.
And the stark realisation came when the bailiff came in from Kingston County Court to collect the $20 million. And we said, well, sit down, have a cup of tea and see if we can find the chequebook. Luckily, he had a sense of humour, but it didn't alter the fact that I was in the shit.
So much was made of it, it all just seemed a hammer to crack a nut.
The reality of it was that I had a judgment against me that was now to be enforced, or tried to be enforced, in the UK, and there's no way I had the resources to defend it, or a legal team that would even look at it. It came to, I think, one evening with Trevor Bayliss. He had a friend at the Times newspaper.
I suggested that to him simply because I thought that with the media behind him, he's in with a bit of a chance.
Jack Mulvin was a highly respected Sunday Times legal columnist.
He wrote an article for me on the story, and I said, could you do me a real favour and plant at the end of the article any legal help desperately needed? And he did. And I got about 12 calls from lawyers or legal firms who were interested in taking on the case.
Of course, Andrew was looking for lawyers who would work on a no-win, no-fee basis.
I chose one man who was Seamus Andrews, and he convinced me that he could take the case on as well as anybody else.
In no-win, no-fee cases, lawyers and their barristers often charged double their normal fees. But win or lose, what Andrew had to do was front up the not insubstantial court fees. Seamus's company were relatively new to copyright law, whereas Lucas's side rolled out the legal big guns.
Lucas employed Harbottle and Lewis, top London law firm.
With that sort of calibre of opposition, it was clear that Andrew was going to need a high-profile barrister to represent him in court.
It was really getting quite awkward. We hadn't got a QC to fight the case for us, and we were going to get screwed, to say the least. We finally got the patronage of a top QC.
Barristers Alistair Wilson and George Hamer came forward. Both were attracted by such a high-profile case.
I liked Andrew. I thought it was. I was particularly impressed by his studio and seeing his equipment and hearing how he did this work.
With his legal team now assembled, the High Court beckoned. The case would be presided over by venerated judge, Justice Mann. Bizarrely, the austere courtroom was lined with mannequins dressed in full Star Wars regalia. Will they be there for the entire case? The judge remarked.
For all sorts of very complicated reasons, the issue of whether English copyright was infringed in this case depended entirely on whether the mask could be regarded as a sculpture. And that was actually a jolly interesting question. The case started with the other side having one of the masks under a glass dome on a velvet plinth, looking just like a bust of Caesar or something. Massively important, valuable artwork. And it was quite impressive seeing it standing there like a bust of Caesar. One could well imagine that it was a sculpture. I think it was when we started bouncing the thing around and you could see that it was just made out of a flimsy piece of plastic that you could hold on your little finger, that people began to realise that actually it's just a film prop, not a sculpture at all.
After 4 weeks of vicious cross-examination, the whole case boiled down to just one issue.
In copyright law, section 5152 of the copyright law refers to the difference between the length of copyright that can be secured on an artistic piece of work. You can have a sculpture or an industrial design.
Judge Mann believed that because the Stormtrooper helmets and all the other characters Andrew created had a practical use, They therefore could not be regarded as works of art and were in fact an industrial design.
And that's what it was proved to be, an industrial design. In which case, the length of copyright is 15 years in this case, and it was over some 17 years ago. So the last 17 years, Lucas has had no copyright.
The judgment meant Andrew had no case to answer because there was no English copyright in existence.
When the court case was over and Andrew seemed to have been vindicated,
In theory, you should be very relieved. The reality is, because you had been put through hell and high water, that you don't feel relieved. You just don't feel anything.
The 17-day proceedings had not been at all pleasant. Andrew was constantly attacked, ridiculed and undermined by Lucas's legal team. The whole case had gotten deeply personal.
The Lucas clients were not given to compromise on anything if they could possibly avoid it. They really gave the impression, to me at least, of strongly disliking Mr. Ainsworth.
Lucas obviously found it difficult to accept the judgment and appealed to have it heard again in the appeal courts.
With no date set for the Court of Appeal, Andrew started getting to work making his products, mainly Stormtroopers, and started shipping them all over the world, with the notable exception of the United States.
And I think it was about another 2 years before the case came up again at the appeal courts in London.
The appeal courts are made up of 3 high-ranking judges who review in minute detail George Justice Mann's full 280-paragraph judgment. Lucas's legal team strenuously argued that it was fundamentally flawed, whilst Andrew's side maintained it was not.
The judgment in our favour was upheld yet again.
In the Court of Appeal, we got our costs because we won everything in the Court of Appeal.
And Lucas was at that point denied the ability to go any further, i.e. to the Supreme Court. We had costs in our favour, so that was quite a successful result for us.
I think Andrew had the most extraordinary victory, an almost unbelievable one, because the amount of money and mentality that were brought to bear against him were extraordinary.
People think that you should feel this wonderful sense of elation. You don't. You just feel so totally drained. There's nothing there to feel.
The British courts had delivered a hammer blow to the Star Wars multi-billion-dollar licensing empire. The appeal court's decision not to allow any further proceedings left Lucasfilms with seemingly nowhere to go. Desperate to find some sort of leverage, they called in the heavy artillery.
Lucas asked for 8 weeks stay, in which he went back to America to get backing from famous people in the film industry, namely Cameron and Spielberg, Disney, I think Hasbro Toys, and even the FBI. It seemed a little bit disproportionate.
There had been some quite high-powered people making a fuss about the decision in the Court of Appeal. I don't think it did them much good in the end.
Yeah, I feel that George Lucas, who was the nice young man that I met, has turned into basically probably what he always intended, which is a sort of business empire.
With such acute levels of pressure being brought to bear, the British government intervened and overturned the appeal court's ruling by sending the case to the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land.
The first Star Wars film was made at Elstree Studios in England and on location in Tunisia.
And at stake was Andrew's right to make and sell the characters he had created. and for Lucasfilms the fundamental issue of whether a judgment made in an American court can be heard in the UK. The Supreme Court is made up of the country's 7 most revered law lords. Lucasfilms added a new barrister to their team, the most successful copyright advocate, Jonathan Sumption, who would argue there needed to be an unprecedented and historical change in British law.
By this time, Lucas had come to the realisation that he had well and truly lost on the copyright element, and so he concentrated on imposing an American judgment in another country. To win that point, he had to concede that the judgment against us in America had to be dismissed.
So to Andrew's great relief, the $20 million Californian judgment had finally been wiped away.
We won on English copyright law. I wasn't so happy about the result so far as American copyright law was concerned. That was a bit of a disappointment.
But it meant that henceforth any copyright judgment made in a US court can be heard in the UK, a fundamental and unprecedented change in British law.
I just think it was another agenda. It was about changing laws. It was about money, nothing to do with people.
I think that what has happened in this case is that the British courts have not liked to upset the American court, and they have tried to reach a compromise which won't upset the Americans too much.
There was a downside for Andrew. Unlike the appeal court, who had awarded him costs, the Supreme Court had a different view.
Well, there were 2 points in the case. We won one of them, we lost the other one. So they said 6 of one, half dozen of the other. You get nothing. So I got nothing.
The Supreme Court deemed that there should be no costs either way at this point.
Yeah, I feel they've been treated remarkably badly by the final Supreme Court's decision. They actually won, and they are entitled, in my opinion, to be seen to win.
So with no costs being awarded to Andrew, who was going to pay his legal bill?
Our lawyers, to some extent, were working on a CFA, which is a bit like no win, no fee, but the problem was I won, so I have a fee. And so now I have a very polite letter from our lawyers and barristers laying out the costs to date, and better than a $20 million judgment, this is a mere £4.3 million. Not the best result I've had.
I feel Andrew's situation now is rather desperate because he is stuck with enormous legal costs, which I cannot see how he can ever get that amount of money to pay it.
But why was it the Supreme Court decided to make the historic change to British law?
It was quite. They could have gone either way. It was an important question of, I suppose, economic policy, and they decided that claimants can bring actions against Englishmen who are infringing American patents. That you don't have to go, or copyrights anyway. You don't have to go to America to do it. You can sue them here.
And so people on the other side of the pond in the film business or having intellectual property arguments with UK companies could now enforce judgments in the UK. This is a complete change in the law and a watershed in the legal history.
I didn't really have an opinion. I couldn't care a toss about the law, actually. It was more what really just affected us.
It was a great victory for Andrew because it not only wiped out the $20 million American claim, it also left him free to make and sell his products in every country in the world except the USA. For that, he had every reason to be delighted.
At the end of the day, we've stood up for our principles, we've got our business to make the products we created in the first place. And so, you know, we could be thankful.
I feel that a decision was made by George Lucas to intimidate us. That was a business decision, and it was a wrong decision. And we've won.